This is the Howell Business Beat. I am one of the co-hosts here, Janelle Best, and I have with me today Diane Samples, my co-host. Welcome, Diane.
Hey, hi. Well, can't even talk right now. Hello.
Well, perfect day to be recording.
I know it's been a trend this morning, but yeah, I'm excited to be back.
Yeah, we are super thrilled to just have a great guest on today that I think everybody will just, Diane and I had the privilege of meeting Jazz back in November, and she had some really cool things to say that we thought would be really relevant to our conversations that we've been having. We've talked a little bit about, a lot about different things, especially managing with things in the workplace as it relates to people is kind of where Jazz's expertise comes in. So I'm not going to steal too much of the thunder here.
I'm ready to jump right in. I want to know more about the people analytics. I think that's it's an intriguing topic.
Absolutely. So we have Jasmit Kaur with us today, and she is the owner of Culturebie. So welcome, Jazz.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, my stomach just growled. I'm sorry. I feel like it picked it up on the mic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. If you could just share a little bit about your background, Culturebie. Yeah. What is it? What do you do? And I'm excited to learn more.
I'll ask you a question.
Yes.
When you hear the term people analytics, what does it mean to you?
I mean, I feel like I know a little bit, but maybe I don't. But I think it's I probably don't. That's what
No, just go with it.
The data. I think it's looking at people and how, like, kind of measuring like how they feel about things, right? And how they respond maybe to certain things, their likes, dislikes. Yeah.
I kind of think the same way. I think kind of how they use like analytics on social media, like they're taking a person and being like, okay, this like, this dislike, and just kind of same thing Janelle said, just how they interpret people.
Yes.
But it's all database. It's all database.
Yeah, it's data driven. So really, people analytics is a buzzword. It's called HR analytics. It's called workforce analytics. It could be called anything. We kind of, as Culturebie, latched on to the term people analytics, and now we are basically using that to explain how we use data and insights to help companies retain and engage their employees better and build a better workplace. And so the type of data that we use is turnover information, employee demographics, because, employees are employees, but every employee is different. They come from different backgrounds. They work in different functions. They belong to different age groups. Their tenure in the company is different. That's what I mean when I say demographics. So tenure data, demographics data, employee survey feedback. And now employee survey feedback, it could happen at the time of onboarding or offboarding or leaving the company, or while they're in the company. Organizations often solicit feedback from employees just as a matter of hygiene factor, just kind of like, just checking in, making sure they're okay, or like taking feedback on specific key events at the company, like, you're changing the organization structure, you're implementing a new technology in the organization, because we know that when you implement something new, especially technology, it's not the technology that causes failure. 90% of the times, okay, fine, 80% of the times, it's people issues. So that's kind of what we do, that standalone, all this data is just sitting in different pockets of the organization. We help companies integrate all these different pieces of information, synthesize it, analyze it, and then produce insights that can help leaders make very strategic decisions that ultimately helps them retain and engage their people.
It's amazing, and it's kind of ironic too, just because we talked a little bit about conflict management on our previous show and how to manage that, but looking more forward and kind of taking that proactive approach is what it sounds like you're doing at Culturebie.
That's correct. Yeah.
So that's amazing. Now, how did you get into this? I mean, what drove you to
Oh goodness, my entire career has been a series of accidents.
I like that.
well, now we're intrigued.
Yeah, now you're intrigued. So you interested in really
Oh, absolutely.
So in my undergrad years, I was like a pretty aimless kid. One thing I was really certain about was that I didn't want to do what typically, at least in my generation of Indian, kids and their parents, they would basically go into either engineering or medical. Though I kick myself now, I should have gone into engineering. But my sister went into medicine. My parents expected I would go into engineering or one of them, and I was like, no, I was a total rebel. And I decided to study French, public administration, economics. And then I decided, okay, what do people do from here on? And my family background-wise, 90% of my family are basically farmers. And then there's this 10% who are doctors or engineers. Mm-hmm. Nobody had a clue about, what do you do with this kind of a profile, whatever I had studied. So somebody suggested, MBA is a thing, you can do an MBA. And there's a pretty prestigious institute in India called XLRI, Xavier's Labor Relations Institute of Management, and my sister, who was studying medicine, filled out my forms. Well, that's how aimless I was. I was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to fill out the forms. They only accept 60 people. Okay, there's no way. Okay, so it's, I'm probably doing some kind of a humble brag here. But anyway, so she didn't know what the two programs were offered as part of XLRI's, MBA program. One was called PM&IR, the other was called BM. And she was like, oh, PM&IR looks longer, might be more interesting. She just checks that. So BM stands for General Business Management. And PM&IR stands for MBA with a specialization in Personnel Management and Industrial Relations, which is Human Resources. So I got into the institute. I think it was 2 weeks in the program that I realized, oh, I'm in something called human resources. Anyway, so that was how my biggest accidental, entry into that HR space. I started my career with PricewaterhouseCoopers, extensively worked in management consulting, primarily in large-scale change management projects, which means, how do you move the needle when it comes to people's readiness to change. I then moved to Microsoft. I worked there for almost a decade. And one thing that I observed in every role that I had at Microsoft was that leaders at Microsoft really were obsessed and in a good way about data whenever it came to making any kind of decision, whether it was business decisions, whether it was people decisions. But when it came to making people decisions driven on data, they were not as satisfied because our tools and technologies weren't set up in a way for the HR teams to really take out the data, the metrics, and provide that information. That's where I sort of accidentally fell into doing data analytics and storytelling for executives at Microsoft. And after doing that for a couple of years, I felt that, doing all that manually and just based on and not on an ongoing basis, on a quarterly basis, if there's a review with an executive at Microsoft, you'd gather the data, do the analysis. But that's not how humans function. That's not how employees work. Employees have sentiments and feelings all the time. So could there be a better way of leveraging technology to get real-time insights about your people and culture? So I left Microsoft. I went back to school. I studied data science and HCI, human-computer interaction, and that's why I said, dang, if I listened to my parents, I would have gone into engineering first, and I wouldn't have to go back into technology later. So I picked up those skills. I founded Culturebie, and basically what Culturebie has is a people analytics platform. It's a cloud-based application that integrates data from multiple sources, and one of the key sources is employee surveys. So that's kind of my journey into what I do.
I'm glad that you shared that it came full circle with us, because I was like, gosh, I thought she was really passionate about what she does. So you clearly are. But at first I was like, oh, okay.
But it's funny
It was
that
surprising.
you disassociate it with engineering, because I look at that very much as almost like being a people engineer. Like you have that same analytical mindset where you're taking all that data and you're kind of separating it out, and you're analyzing it, and you're using it to come up with hopefully like a better culture. Your end product, I think, is the culture of whatever company you're working with.
And you could be a great branding person. So people science, people engineering, I think that's kind of this workspace.
Absolutely.
For a long time, I think this whole decisions around people and culture have been very gut-based. And there's nothing wrong with including your gut instincts and general sense for the population to make such decisions. But when the world is moving towards more use of data and analytics for every other kind of decision making, why not also for your employees, is the point that I keep harping on. That, your companies, without even batting an eyelid, they look at customer experience feedback to make decisions. What about your employees? Don't we say that employees are your most important asset? I don't like that term, but for lack of better term, the most important aspect of your business. So why not pay the same level of importance to them?
Yeah, it is interesting too when you think about it in that perspective, because I think one of the things when you're looking at a business and they have a product to sell, and you're doing the customer service satisfaction surveys, but even looking at the product in the lens of your employee, and what does that look like? Because if they're not, so to speak, drinking the Kool-Aid, then why and how are they going to be able to promote or sell what you're doing, or innovate or evolve or.
Absolutely. Your employees are the best indicator of how much Kool-Aid your customers are going to drink.
I like that.
And there's established research that if employees are more engaged, they'll be better advocates of the company's products and services to their customers. So, yeah.
So from, like that sales point or that, product basis, obviously your employees are incredibly important when it comes to that. But how does it relate in some of the ways that we're seeing today is, in that I'm going to call it the workforce crunch, and what does this mean to employers when we look at these people analytics and data?
Yeah, isn't it crazy? Like on the one hand, we have all the layoffs happening, but on the other hand, we're talking about workforce crunch. But I know you already know that it's basically an industry difference. We are seeing most of the layoffs happening in the technology industry. I think last year up to 150,000 layoffs. And then if I add up, I think around 200,000. But then just in the last, I think couple of months, 3 months, we added around 1 million jobs. So where is this, the workforce crunch coming from? And that's basically the job addition and the workforce crunch is happening primarily in the sectors that we don't talk about so much. I just think about like tech sector that employs a smaller portion of the workforce, but because it's so loud, it occupies a lot of our brain share. It talks so much. But then where we are experiencing the work crunch is like sectors like restaurant industry. I think, manufacturing sector, smaller companies losing their workforce to the pizza parlor down the street.
Hospitality,
absolutely. Yeah. Hospitality. I think healthcare, nursing homes. Apparently, I just read this morning that nursing homes, they have worker shortage that apparently will not be fulfilled until 2027. They will continue to have deficiencies.
It's so scary when you think of the work that they do and the aging population.
Exactly.
It's who's going to be there to take care of your loved ones. And that's really scary.
Yeah,
it is interesting. And I think healthcare is a huge kind of more of a critical, obviously, sector, right? But we are seeing like this also like the trends of like this great resignation or this silent quitting or those types of things. And, are those things that you're able to kind of measure and look at? And, what are some things you see there? Personally, I have a friend that's an ER doctor and he's resigning. He's done. He's been an ER doctor for 5 years, and he is done.
That is
There's huge burnout in
Huge.
the healthcare space. But I want to just sorry, Diane, you were saying.
Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just saying that a neighbor who is a good friend of ours, and she happened to be our nurse practitioner for years, she last year did the same exact thing. She is just like, I'm done. I can't. She's lost her, I don't want to say she lost her passion, but the industry in healthcare changed so dramatically that she's like, I can retire, and I'm going to retire, and I'm just not going to look back.
Yeah. And it's so, and a few moments ago, you asked the question about workforce crunch. And I was like, there is this workforce crunch, but there's also layoffs. And it's in this industry that we are talking about. And what can companies do about it? The response to that ties back to why there is workforce crunch to some extent. I wish I could say that every problem around workforce crunch had something to do with, culture and employee engagement. But the truth is some factors were beyond our control. But I will share the factors which directly tie to the type of work that Culturebie is focused on, which is employee experience and retention and engagement. So one of them, you already hinted to it, is burnout. A lot of exodus that happened from all these sectors that we were talking about, hospitality, restaurant, nursing homes, healthcare. It was to some extent fear of COVID, during the pandemic, that people don't want to get sick and everything. So, but a lot of it was that people were burnt out. And add to that the layer of COVID, they were like, no, we're done. Okay. And then suddenly, and in parallel, there were remote jobs that were opening up. And a lot of these people were like, some of them were like, I'm just exiting the workforce, especially if they were on the brink of retirement. They were like, I'm just getting out now. And the others were like, I can do a remote job. I'm done with this, either unsafe work or hard physical labor. So I'll just do a remote job elsewhere. So that's how, by ignoring probably the burnout factors and employee well-being for years and years, okay, it kind of just was a catalyst to that kind of leaking of talent that happened during the pandemic. Gosh, sorry, that's my Apple Watch telling me that I should probably do something.
It's all good. Technology.
Yeah. So just to recap, so I think employee burnout is definitely a factor that led to that kind of exodus. And healthcare industry, I hope it looks at the science and does something about it. I notice, and I have family that's in medicine, like I said, that, my family either was into farming or they're engineers or they're physicians or doctors. So, I've learned firsthand from them, there's this whole physician and the nursing population in a hospital environment, in a healthcare environment, and then there are administrators. And there's a disconnect between them. Because the administrators are focused on gaining profits, making the system operate very efficiently. That's their primary focus. And the practitioners, the healthcare practitioners, like nurses and physicians, they are just meeting the patients and trying to deliver on what makes the hospital meets its numbers. But who is thinking about the burnout factors and their well-being? If it's really a red flag, it's should be something should be blaring in the ears of hospital administrators and leadership to, really address some of those issues.
Are you starting to see that? Is that something that they're starting to step back and take that kind of...
So a lot of healthcare organizations, especially large organizations, they're really good at employee listening, listening to employees in terms of surveys. And it's true for a lot of companies. They're good at conducting surveys, but they're not necessarily good in terms of taking data and feedback, going to insights, and then taking insights to action. I think that's something that's pretty universally, most companies are not excellent at it.
And is that something that you can help with?
I think so. The direction where I'm going in is that, we know that analytics is not intuitive. Statistics is not intuitive. There's a lot being said and, written about it. So the goal of our platform is to use artificial intelligence so that we can convert all the rigorous statistical analysis that we are doing with the data. The text, comments is gold. I mean, when you hear something in the words of employees, it really resonates. You really understand the issues. So we do natural language processing to do some text and analytics, but all this analysis is then presented in plain English in front of, the organization leaders so that they can clearly see the insights. They understand, okay, what are the issues? What's driving those issues? What's the root cause? And therefore, what are the recommended actions? So we kind of simplifying them. But the last mile of all this, which is actually implementing those actions, are in the hands of leaders. We don't have much control over that, but at least helping them traverse the journey of collecting feedback, analysis, getting to insights. Our goal is to use technology to accelerate that and make it easy.
So for that implementation piece, do you work with other companies, or is there someone else out there that they can bring in to say, hey, this is what, Culturebie said to do. How do we do that?
That's a great question. Like I said, you're a strategist. Look at the strategic feedback and insights you're gaining. So that's something very just in the last 3 months, we've started to think about it, which is could we build an ecosystem of especially local service providers. So for example, one of the insights might say, there's a pay inequity issue in the organization, or you're not paying fairly compared to the market. So could there be payroll specialists, benchmarking specialists that we could recommend the company to say that, hey, we've vetted these guys, they're local, okay? And why I emphasize on local is that the truth is that truly implementing something in an organization in such a way often requires your local set of vendors, providers, and consultants. So we could even do that. Well, in terms of providing solutions, you could give them all, but I feel we'll give I'm already thinking about the algorithm and the weightage we would give to the local vendors who are vetted, who meet a certain criteria and have testimonials attached to them. So we are thinking about, creating that ecosystem. We don't have that today, but we've gotten a lot of feedback that last mile is where most companies fail because, they don't have the bandwidth or the resources to even implement things.
And the analytics is just kind of the start, right? That's the tip of the iceberg. So it takes those follow-up steps. Really, really great information. And I know that you have a lot of really great data too. I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to share that's relevant or pertinent to the conversation today, but I also wanted to take an opportunity to just hit on, and we've talked a little bit about the workforce crunch, but any other challenges or trends that you're seeing in the workplace today that, are shaping and taking the place and changing the way people work and do things?
Yeah, I think now this is an issue that not all companies might be facing, but something that I'm seeing across our customers and a lot of my colleagues in this space is this whole issue of hybrid work, remote work, in-person work. How do we solve it? I thought that, by now we would have all figured it out. We haven't. Every company is trying out different techniques. So I think that's where a couple of things that come to my mind are that, this is not a tug of war between employees and leaders, because I'm already beginning to see that leaders are the power balance is shifted. We're seeing layoffs happening and I'm tired of everybody working remotely. Should we bring people back? So that's the kind of question I'm getting that, based on your data analytics and based on what you're seeing, do you think this is a good point for us to pull the lever and bring everybody back to the office? And then employees are continuing to say that, and again, I have to qualify that. Not all employees. I will say roughly half your workforce is saying that, we want to work remote. We are enjoying it and enjoying it in the sense of the work-life balance, but we also have evidence that, being productive. But there is a tension. So regardless of what decision companies end up making, I think from now until the point where everything is stabilized and companies stick with the balance that works for them, I would say they should keep in mind a couple of things. One is our earlier issue of burnout. Okay, we know that 1 in 4 people are burnt out, regardless of whether they work remotely or in person. And people who are remote workers, 60% of them report burnout. Okay, because they are working remotely, they are probably that work-life balance and the boundary between work and life has diminished. So we are seeing all that research, plus our own data is showing that work-life balance and employee well-being actually is one of the top 5 concerns among the workforce. Okay, so definitely.
Are employers seeing that as a concern?
Employers are seeing that as a concern. Because it translates into things like for certain type of workforce, it would translate into absenteeism. For some others, it's just turnover. Employees just leave the company and look for some other job elsewhere. So there, I think from well-being standpoint, you asked me for the challenges and the solutions. So I think well-being, I think solutions in terms of the benefits that you're offering, be thoughtful about that. There are a lot of resources that companies give in terms of well-being, health, the gym facility, for example, I think EAP resources, mental well-being resources. So there are a lot of solutions, and I think I don't have to preach on that. There are experts who know that better. The second point I would say is manager capability. Your managers, who are the front line of your employees' experience with the company, are going to make or break their experience in the organization. And especially because most of the organizations are delegating that responsibility to managers about whether employees should work remote or hybrid or the extent of flexibility that they offer. You have some managers who will be like, oh, take everything, do work from wherever. And then there might be others who are very tough to work with, who are not giving an inch to the employee. And, flexibility is a spectrum, right? What most employees are asking is really reasonable amount of flexibility that, I have a medical appointment, I have to go spend some time with my kids at their school. That's human, So some managers could be extreme. So how do you coach and managers and build that manager capability?
I love that you mentioned that. Because this is something that I feel like I've heard from some of our HR professionals, just looking at how to provide that type of training and to empower managers as leaders and to really help shape them into these well-rounded individuals that can support a workforce. Because one of the things that, and I don't know the stat on it, but a lot of people quit because of their managers or a poor leader, right?
Yes.
So the other side of that is the training. So how do you provide that type of training for that level of leadership?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that you have the answer, but just interesting, intriguing things to think about.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think even, I have done extensive work in manager capability development, so we could do another podcast just on that.
Oh, I love that. Okay.
But I will say, very quickly, I'll touch on things like, your manager selection process, more empathy, more human approach. Okay. So how do you select managers, not because they are great individual contributors, but because they really are good people leaders? The second is onboarding them. And I think the third is performance measurement. How do you reward and recognize them? Because very often organizations, they continue to reward people managers as individual contributors, not for their people capabilities. So just a quick touch on those things. So now going back to, in this whole hybrid flexibility, all that, those kind of issues, I talked about well-being. I talked about manager capabilities being an issue. The third is connectedness to the culture. Employees are, especially remote workers, are reporting they feel less connected to the organization. And different studies have different numbers around it, but commonsensically, you would assume that, right? That can happen. And that's where some of the solutions could be very solid onboarding for new employees, because the new employees, those first 6 to 9 months, is the time when they're beginning to get to know your culture, your people, and feeling that connection. So how do you be very methodical about it, that you build that strong foundation. And other than that, for ongoing employees, I think, again, coaching, mentoring, creating some physical in-person days for, the serendipity, like accidental, innovation and collaboration. And for some companies, by the way, as I say that, they will recognize, and this is where I emphasize, collecting data over time, not just employee feedback, but also tracking your collaboration metrics, your productivity metrics. And organizations might realize that kind of like remote work or hybrid work or wherever they are on the spectrum of flexibility doesn't work for them, and they need to shift in a different direction. So yeah.
Oh, well, you had just mentioned that you have to collect that data over time. So is there even like an average time, like when you are talking to the CEOs and the decision makers, is there like, well, it's 6 months of data, or it's 12 months of data, 18 months? What do you need to really?
So I think some metrics you collect all the time. These are metrics that are not intrusive. You're not like poking employees every 15 seconds that, give me feedback. No, I'm talking about things like your performance ratings. As and when they happen, we're gathering data, we are seeing a trend. As and when attrition and turnover is happening, we're gathering data such as is it good turnover? Is it bad turnover? Do we regret it? Do we not? What was the profile? What was the feedback this employee had given in the past? This is ongoing. Now, the other part is where you're soliciting feedback from employees. That's where, if I was a savvier businesswoman, I would have said, oh, you should collect it all the time. So I would say, I think in general, I think in companies which are very stable, things are going fine, I would say once or twice a year is great. I know technology allows you to collect that, every month, every week, every second, ping people on Slack. I think that's too much. Why? It's not because getting feedback regularly and frequently is bad. It's because you can't take action on it. If you can't take action on it, people are going to develop the same sentiment that most employees have today, which is that, surveys are useless because I'm going to tell you stuff and you're not going to do anything about it. So I'll say use the power of surveys, feedback, technology wisely, and use it only as many times as you can take action on it.
Awesome. I love that. I
great
feel
point.
like we could talk for a very long time. This is just fascinating to me. And it was just a really great experience the first time we met, and it is only lived up to that at this point. So we do have to wrap up today, and I just wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to come on to our show and sharing some insight with us. As we do wrap up, I want to give you the opportunity to share any final thoughts or and your contact information.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I'll start with the easier part first. Contact information. We're at culturebie.com, www.culturebie.com, and I think
we'll include it in the show notes.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we're active on LinkedIn. That's the only social media that our bandwidth allows. We're a HR tech firm based in Ann Arbor, still growing. And I think in terms of my final words would be good management principles are always in fashion. They never go away. So I think no matter all these terms that we hear, great resignation or quiet quitting and whatnot, it boils down to whether employees are feeling heard and they have a good, positive, strong experience in the organization. And for that, organizations should start looking at data more carefully and use technology to glean insights and then take action. So
great advice. Thank you so much.
I think our mantra for these two shows were listening,
I was just going to say that. The common thread has been listen,
and then take action based on what you hear, but it's taking listening to that next level and really.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for your time. Thank you for everybody tuning in and listening to the How Business Be, and we'll look forward to next time.
Thank you for having me.